Of Jail's Head, Book 1, Bloodkin, by Kathy Ashford. Me. Chapter 6. I finished my enormous sandwich and sat back with a happy sigh. We had found the cafe on the corner and were sitting at one of the outside tables, watching the crowds drift past. While we had been sitting there, more people had come to greet Charlie. He seemed to have been ridiculously popular, and he remembered the names of everyone who had come to welcome him back to Little and congratulate him on becoming a mentor. Well, I was here for 8 years, on and off, he explained after I complained about the number of people he knew. I mean, most winters I travelled around, mostly down south for the warmth. He grinned self-deprecatingly. But for the last 8 years I was a journeyman. I spent the summers here. I grew rather fond of the city. This was not uncommon, I learned. A lot of Neathi spent the winters in the south, or would even go back to the enclaves for the colder seasons. What? So the court is pretty much deserted in winter? I asked glumly. Hardly. There are many of us who are hardy souls and don't mind, really. And this year will be different, of course, what with the royal party arriving. This was certainly not the first time the imminent arrival of the Queen and her advisor had been mentioned. In fact, I had heard a number of conversations about the movement of the government, and people seemed genuinely excited about it. Yep, the Queen should be here just after Yule. They'll be done off all tested this year, which is why I had to stop in there to receive my assignment. Charlie laughed. If you think Lou was busy now, you should see it in a royal year. There is a heap of partying to be done. We sipped our iced coffees in the shade, and Charlie pulled out his moss pipe and packed it with moss from his gold-coloured bag. How, Charlie? Isn't this a bit, public? I fretted. He smiled. Moss is completely legal, boy. Well, apart from the black, of course. Gosh, you humans are allowed to smoke that tobacco stuff, and that shit is bad for you. Most varieties of gold are about as efficacious as coffee, but moss isn't addictive like caffeine. Why do we even bother drinking it then? Coffee? Because it tastes so nice. He grinned and handed me the pipe. And it's infinitely less expensive than moss. He blinked at it and I breathed in the herbaceous vapour. What? No sparklight? I asked, handing it back to him. He giggled. We're in the quarter now, Jazz. We're not showing off. Gosh! Jazzeth! I heard a familiar voice behind us and turned to see Jimmy, laden with shopping bags and tugging a wary-looking Lalitha behind him. They had obviously paid a visit to Min Tardiella as well, because Lalitha was clad in a mint-green robe. The colour offset her golden skin and dark eyes, and although she was clearly tired, she looked rather fetching. She's a lesbian, I reminded myself sternly. Definitely not going to be interested. Still, doesn't hurt to look. Jimmy pulled up 2 chairs to our table and sat Lalitha down on one. On the gold, eh, Kyosh? Ideal! Give Letha a hoot. Poor darling desperately needs it. I'm afraid I've rather tired her out. I'll be back in a second. And he ducked inside the cafe to order food and more drinks. Charlie passed the pipe to Lalitha, which she accepted with a sceptical raise of an eyebrow, and he lit it for her with a blink. After a couple of puffs, she straightened and handed the pipe to me. Gosh, that's better. We've been shopping all day and I was about ready to pass out. Sucking on the pipe again, I felt infinitely better too. My feet still tingled now I was off them, but I felt alive, full of energy. I could have gone on exploring the quarter for hours. Jimmy wove through the tables back to us, carrying a pitcher of iced coffee and 2 more glasses, followed by a waitress bearing plates of filled bread rolls. He plopped down with a sigh on the spare chair and poured the coffee. While the other 2 ate, Charlie told them about our day so far. Jimmy was distracted, devouring his food hungrily, but Lalitha ate more delicately, nodding thoughtfully at Charlie as he talked. When they had finished, Jimmy repacked the pipe from his own pouch and sent it round again. Jimmy told us about their activities that day. They had been to all the places we had, as well as to a cobbler's to fit Lalitha for new boots and a pair of formal-style slippers. We both had new Neathi-style pens, and we pulled them out of our bags to compare. Lalitha's was thinner than mine, worked in copper filigree and rich mahogany wood, and had been filled with a dark green ink. "It's my favourite colour," she offered with a shrug. "Wasn't mint ideal of fun?" Jimmy asked me and nudged Lalitha. "And isn't she pretty in her new robes?" Lalitha looked like she wanted to slide under the table. She shoved him roughly in the shoulders. "Shut up, Jimmy." Jimmy just laughed. "I'm sorry, little one, but you do look lovely. You too, Jessa. The rose suit you." And then it was my turn to blush. It would seem that the Niathi were generous with their compliments, but I definitely hadn't gotten used to it yet. "Oh, Jimmy, have you been to see Fianyacha yet?" Jimmy chuckled. "Sure have. I ducked in the first day we were here." "And how is she?" "Still crazy. She's been experimenting with hair dye of all things, and she looks, well, you'll have to see her. You'll laugh." Who this Fianyacha was, I had no idea. But although Jimmy had been to see her a few days earlier, they volunteered to go with us when we finished our drinks. I wondered briefly if she was Charlie's mysterious older woman, but he was acting far too casually, so I dismissed the thought. Feeling marvellously refreshed, I followed the other three from the cafe, away from the direction of the hall, but roughly parallel to the shore of the lake. The afternoon had begun to cool, but if anything, the streets were more busy. Jimmy seemed to know pretty much everyone we passed, and a blushing Lalitha was introduced proudly. She seemed to shrink from the attention and the understanding smiles. "I hate this," she muttered to me as Jimmy and Charlie laughed with a group of Niathi, and we took the opportunity to relax on a bench. They take one look at me with Jimmy, and they know. "Eh? Know what?" I asked stupidly. "That I'm, gay." "Oh." A male mentor wouldn't have a girl Bloodkin otherwise. I feel so obvious. I hadn't realized it was a secret. She blushed. "Yeah, well, I've been trying to keep it a secret for years." "And how did that go for you?" She snorted. "Yep, pretty shit. But things at home were different." She scratched her head and looked down. "Yeah, but Lil's different, isn't it? It's not like anyone around here minds." "I know," she sighed. "Still, I feel like I'm walking around with a big flashing sign saying 'Great Ugly Lesbian' on my head." The bitterness in her voice surprised me. "But you're not ugly at all," I blurted out, and she glanced up at me with a wry smile. "Ha! Yeah, thanks, Jazz. Hey, at least I'm not still walking around in human clothes like that snobby bitch Seller." My pulse quickened at the mention of the gorgeous Seller, but I tried to appear disinterested. "Oh?" "Yeah. Her and Emma were the first to move into the hall. She's from Lil, and her father's someone terribly important. It's a pity, because Emma's just so goddamn nice. And women usually aren't, once they, know." "What? They'll think you hit on them? That's retarded." "Yeah, well." Lalitha shrugged. Slightly uncomfortable, I steered the conversation back to Seller. "Though, surely that's why Emma is her mentor." "Yeah?" "Yeah, I mean, Charlie mentioned something about mentors being assigned their bloodkin based on temperament. I'm sure Emma will mellow her out." "Well, I'd rather it happen sooner rather than later. Honestly, the girl is a pain in the ass." She looked up at our mentors, laughing happily with more Niathi who had stopped to chat. Charlie was gesturing like mad and grinning widely. "Look at Charlie go. He's so gregarious." Lalitha laughed. "What does that say about you?" "That I'm, shy?" "Yeah, sure. Socially inept, more like." She grinned at me teasingly. As if hearing his name, Charlie and Jimmy disengaged from the crowd and wandered over to us. "Sorry about that, kids. Hell, I haven't seen some of those guys for years. Shall we press on?" We stood and walked a little further down the street, then turned down a very dim and narrow lane. It twisted around a corner and stopped in front of a shop. Its arched windows were unshuttered, but the dark amber glass of the windows themselves were closed, and I could not see inside. The stone sign that hung above the door had been chiselled with a curious design, a pouch above what appeared to be a crossed pair of moss pipes. "Come on, my darlings," said Jimmy wickedly as he pushed through the door and led us inside. "I think it's time you met Fiona." The air inside the shop was smoky and sweet, lit by golden light from the windows and amber globes. The front section of the shop hardly seemed like a shop at all. Couches were grouped together beneath the windows, and bookcases were stacked with magazines and newspapers. A small group of humans and Niathi sat in one corner, sharing a moss pipe, and they looked up when we entered and nodded cordially before returning to their conversation. The mentors led us past the front alcove down to the back of the shop. It was furnished like a wealthy family home. The walls hung with tapestries and paintings, including one large landscape that I could have sworn was an ashlew. Down the back, racks were set up along one wall, and they held coloured woven baskets in white, green, blue, gold, red, and purple. They were stacked neatly according to colour and were filled with Niathi smoking moss. The large counter held a clear glass display like the one at the pen merchant, only this one was filled with pipes of all different shapes and sizes, made from glass, wood or metal. The back of the shop seemed deserted, but then we heard a loud string of curses from a room behind the counter. "Fiona, you all right back there?" called Charlie. "Oh, I'm fine, just this bloody thing won't..." A head popped round the corner. "Kyosh, you're back!" The Niathi woman who appeared certainly was an odd-looking creature. She wore not Niathi robes, but a human-style dress, full in the skirt, nipped in tightly at the waist, and her impressive grey décolletage was on display. Odder still was the cloud of bright, sunshine-yellow hair that framed her plump, smiling face. I'd only ever seen Niathi with white hair, evolved without pigment during millennia underground. She manoeuvred her ample frame round the counter, silken skirts swishing to clasp Charlie to her bosom. "Oh, what a pleasant surprise this is! I'm so glad you've come back to us." Releasing him, she turned to me. "So this is your Bloodkin? Welcome, dear!" Before I knew it, I was buried in an embrace, my head fearfully close to her heaving chest. "My name is Fiona O'Dolarenia of the Chano Enclave, but with the Niathi language and all that, you could call me Fiona." She smiled at me brightly and I staggered back. She turned to Lalitha. "And you're Jim Nyatcha's girl. Oh, Jim, darling, you didn't tell me she was so pretty." Lalitha's blush deepened. She was subjected to the same crushing hug as Charlie and me, and she wriggled slightly before accepting the brace as Fiona patted her hair. Welcome to my shop, Fiona's Emporium of Mossy Delights." She chuckled. "Fiona, your hair. Jimmy said something about dye. It looks marvellous." Fiona smiled coquettishly at Charlie and twirled a strand around her finger. "Oh yes, I've been experimenting. This particularly lovely colour comes from the tiny stamens of crocus flowers, would you believe? Hideously expensive, I tell you, but I'm rather hoping the fashion will catch on. White is so boring, you know. Oh, yes, dye for hair is a fun wee project of mine. Not that I don't have enough to do growing moss for you greedy lot." Emboldened by her outgoing demeanour, I asked, "Couldn't you just use your, magic to change the colour?" She looked at me with her head tilted slightly to the side and frowned. Yes, it could. She went over to Charlie and lifted a long strand of his white hair, peering at it intently for a few seconds. It turned bright blue. "Oh, look at that! Very clever, Jasseth." But as she looked up at me and away from the hair, it turned white again. She looked back and humphed her disappointment. "There must be a way to make this more permanent." Fiona, I don't really need it to be more permanent." Charlie looked alarmed. "Fair enough." Fiona plucked the hair from Charlie's head. "Ow! Was that really..." "Shush! I'm concentrating." Fiona stretched the hair in front of her and closed her eyes. Slowly the strand turned bright blue again. Look! It's better. She waved the hair in front of Charlie's face. Permanent. Though I rather think that if you wanted to do it this way, you'd have to do it strand by strand. Maybe with practice it would only take a few hours. She sighed. But I am only a mere horticulturalist. I think I'd better stick with dye. Still, good thinking, Jesseth. Inquisitive minds do well at the academy. Even though it hadn't really worked, I was pleased that Fiona had taken my idea seriously. At home, any suggestion I made to my parents or tutors tended to be brushed off, due to my lack of experience in anything. Jimmy had drifted away to study the pipes in the cabinet, and bade Lalitha to help him choose a new one. Not a bloody glass one this time, I heard him tell her. I'll only drop it or something and it'll smash. Fiona was still contemplating the strand of blue hair, muttering to herself about light reflection and cuticle properties. Oh, I don't suppose you'll be coming down to the Shivering Thistle tonight? She asked abruptly, as if she only just remembered we were there. I heard O'Malley's getting in some wonderful travelling musicians, Bloods, all the way from Allion. And Anastasia will be there, of course. I'm sure she'd like to see you again, Kayosh. Charlie blushed almost imperceptibly. Perhaps this Anastasia was his journeyman crush? Oh, yeah? Oh, I haven't seen her for years. How is she? Yep, his casualness was definitely forced. Fiona cast a pointed glance at Jimmy and Lalitha, still busy with the pipes. Oh, you know Anna, she's fine. It rather sounded like Fiona was holding back on the subject, but Charlie didn't push her. Now, you'll need to restock your moss, yes? She exclaimed brightly, changing the subject. She guided us over to the rack of baskets. I've got a particularly nice new purple in that they've been working on down in Kyo. Charlie blushed outright. I don't really think I'll have much need for purple, he muttered. Fiona cackled and nudged him hard in the ribs. Well, you never know. Although, living in the halls doesn't leave much room for romancing. You've Vienna's rule of no visitors after 10, right? Right. Yeah. I probably just need some white, and maybe a bit of red and gold. Of course. Now, for the white, I find a blend of 1/3 VO alabaster and 2/3 of my own white silence to be particularly helpful. Great for headaches. Charlie nodded, and Fiona used a tiny pair of tongs to measure out moss from the 2 baskets she indicated into a small metal container. It had sharp teeth on the bottom and inside the lid. She screwed the 2 parts together to grind up the moss, and when it had been mixed to her satisfaction, she poured the fluffy granules into Charlie's white leather pouch that he held ready. She repeated the process with the red and gold, explaining to Charlie about the different varietals she had in stock, and mixing them expertly. The mosses themselves all looked pretty much the same, a dry, greeny brown colour, though some were a paler mint colour, some almost orange. But without the coloured-coded baskets, there would be no telling them apart. When she had finished filling Charlie's bag, she took them back to the counter and weighed them carefully, quoting him a price. Charlie counted out coins from his purse, and laughed when he saw my questioning face. Can't really charge this to the hall account. It's purely recreational, he grinned at me. Fiona flapped her hands at him. Jazz will be able to, later on, when it's time for my classes. Wow. You're teaching us? Oh, yes, she said seriously, blinking at me. A study of the use of moth is very important to the education of Bloods. I mean, human children get talked about alcohol, don't they? I laughed. Hardly. Well, they should. Anyway, moss is terribly important, especially the use of the black. I realised, looking over at the baskets again, that there were no black ones there. Oh, I keep it out the back, locked up safely. I deemed it proved after the, incident. Charlie coughed and Fiona didn't elaborate. It seemed like an uncomfortable topic of conversation for both of them. Now, Jimmy, have you chosen one yet? Fiona asked, changing the subject again. Sure have. Jimmy pointed to a substantial hardwood pipe. blocky in design with a long straight stem. Fiona pulled it out of the display and wrapped it for him. When he had paid, Fiona craned her neck round us to look down the front of the shop. I'd better go see if that lot are ready to buy what they've been trying. Thank you for stopping in. It was lovely to see you again, Kaish, and to meet you charming Bloodkin. She beamed at Lalitha and me, ushering us down to the front of the shop. Jimmy, Lalitha and I made for the door, but Charlie lingered, falling in step with Fiona. How is she, really? I overheard him asking quietly. Fiona sighed. She's fine. Her employment is taking its toll. Come to the Thistle tonight. You can see for yourself. Yeah, maybe. At the front of the shop, Fiona waved farewell before going to talk to the group on the couches. We waved back, then pushed through the door to make our way back to the hall in the late afternoon glow. End of chapter 6.